Hi everyone. Today we're talking about music and apartheid and the struggle for freedom in South Africa and Zimbabwe. So starting with South Africa, for a long period of time they were under apartheid, which means apartheid. It was a government regime that was based in racial segregation, white supremacy, and minority rule. So um, during this time, 3.5 million Black Africans were moved to tribal lands and made to carry passes around the country for travel. The idea behind moving all these people was to remove the natives from the narrative of government in South Africa. So these apartheid laws did not only discriminate against Black people, but also against Indians, Asians, and coloreds, which was the name used for people of mixed race. And these people were sent to live in these tribal homelands where they were kept apart from the big cities and from the white people who were running the government. And the idea was to just completely remove them from the picture by removing them from parliament, governmental jobs, restricting them from buying land in certain areas, intense racial segregation, and using these people for cheap labor. As we've seen in many of the other countries and continents that we've explored, music has played a very big role in the fight for freedom. So that is definitely the case in South Africa, and music was performed in a lot of different places: celebrations, funerals, student rallies, religious festivals, meetings, and so on. So all music took place in a lot of different functions at this time. Um, a lot of the music was based on jazz and blues, but it also incorporated a lot of local sounds like some things called marabi and kwela, which meant to get up or jump up. And so these songs were kind of a mix of jazz and blues and local sounds. And the songs were about life under apartheid, and they helped to maintain the struggle by encouraging people to fight, even when it was really, really hard and it might have been easier to give up. These songs were sung in a language that was not used by the majority of the white population because it allowed those who were being oppressed to share their frustration and solidarity in working against the government's attempt to divide and rule them. Something else that became prominent during this time of apartheid was the toi toi, which is it's kind of like a dance. It's where people are running or stomping while chanting or singing political songs during protests and demonstrations. And this was kind of used as the people's weapon because they did not have physical resources to fight back against government forces. So they used this dance to intimidate the police forces and get their point across. And then in Zimbabwe, while apartheid is very closely linked to South African fight for freedom, Zimbabwe was going through very similar struggles. There was white minority rule and a lot of fighting between native guerrilla groups and government forces. And from the 1960s on, the tensions began rising and rising. Uh, Thomas Mapfumo is a famous mbira player from Zimbabwe, and he is known for his chimurenga music, which means music of struggle. Um, and he's extremely famous and well known in Africa and has toured around the world as well. So the mbira is known as a highly spiritual instrument that the Shona people use in rituals to communicate with ancestors and spirits who have passed on. Thomas Mapfumo used the mbira in many of his musical projects, but he also incorporated lots of different styles like Afro rock, American pop and soul, rumba, and Shona music. So he drew from a lot of different styles to create his own. So Thomas was also known to reinterpret mbira songs to write new lyrics to fit current events around him. And this reminded me of some of the rock musicians in Korea and China who would use popular songs and rewrite them to fit whatever was going on in the world at that time. And Thomas's lyrics at first were kind of open to interpretation and not explicitly political, but as things continued to get worse with the government and the racism and segregation, his lyrics became increasingly political. And his music inspired a lot of people to join the liberation struggle by calling for unity and lifting up the indigenous culture and not letting that get swept under the rug as the government was trying to do. Some connections between both of these places. I think that South Africa and Zimbabwe being so close to each other, uh, and both being British colonies played a big part in the fact that they faced very similar struggles. But I do think that you can see that there are cultural differences in terms of lifestyles, ideals, and beliefs, and they're different, but they went through something very similar. And something I think is really interesting to note is that the Toi Toi dance originated in Zimbabwe and made its way to South Africa. So both of these countries used this form of movement and dance to express and demonstrate and protest against similar injustices. Uh, Nelson Mandela is quoted as saying that music has power beyond politics, and I think that's really clear because of the way that it moved and mobilized the people to fight for liberation. And in the end, apartheid legislation was appealed, and Zimbabwe got its independence. So I'm not saying that music was the only force behind this, but it definitely made a strong impact on that fight. And something that I think is important to end with is the quote from the Michigan Committee article saying that music was a revolutionary tool that served to educate, awaken political consciousness, and galvanize the African people to action. And I think it's very clear that that is what happened. Music really moved people to keep fighting, even when things were really bleak and dark, and it might have been easier to just give up and go with whatever the government was saying and doing to these people. So music is extremely powerful, and it's been very interesting to see how it plays out in all these different areas of the world. And there are my references, and that's all. I look forward to discussing with all of you.